If I told you your DNA could say you're Native American, and a Native American tribe could still say you're not? Pause. What if I told you history, not science, decides who belongs? Another pause. And here's the uncomfortable one. What if the most powerful country in the world is using DNA for something it was never designed to do? Because that's exactly what's happening. Right now, somewhere in America, someone is opening a DNA test result that says Native American ancestry detected. They feel proud, curious, emotional. They start asking questions. They start reconnecting with history. Then they take that same DNA result to a tribe, and the tribe says no, not maybe, not let's talk, just no. So what went wrong? Is the DNA lying? Is the tribe lying? Or is history quietly laughing at all of us? Here's where things get messy and a little funny. DNA was designed to tell us where our ancestors came from, not who gets legal recognition, land rights, or political status. But somehow, DNA has been dragged into courtrooms, tribal councils, government policies, and identity debates it never signed up for. That's like using a thermometer to decide who gets citizenship. Yes, it gives data, but you're asking it the wrong question. Historically, Native American identity was shaped by colonization, forced records, broken treaties, blood quantum rules, and, let's be honest, politics, not science. So when modern DNA tests meet centuries-old rules created during oppression, they clash hard. And that clash is why two people with similar DNA results can have completely different identities in the eyes of the law. One is recognized. The other is invisible. Now here's the question you need to answer in the comments. If DNA proves ancestry, but history controls belonging, which one should matter more? And don't lie, history's watching you. If this topic is already making your brain itch, hit the like button so YouTube knows we're not crazy for asking these questions. Subscribe if you enjoy history, told without fear but with sense. And share this video with that friend who thinks DNA tests explain everything. They need this more than they know. Last outline, what comes next? 1. How DNA tests actually work and what they don't measure. 2. Why tribes reject DNA-only claims. 3. The political history behind Native American recognition, or real-life consequences of DNA versus identity. The final truth, science didn't break identity, history did. Ready for the next section when you are. DNA can tell you where your ancestors might have lived. Notice the word might. DNA is polite like that. But DNA cannot tell you who a tribe accepts. It doesn't know ceremonies. It doesn't know community. It doesn't know who showed up when things were hard. And DNA definitely cannot tell you who history erased. Pause. Because erasure doesn't leave genetic fingerprints. It leaves missing records, forced name changes, broken families, and silence. Now flip the knife gently. So why is America acting like DNA is the final judge? Slight smile. Here's the uncomfortable part nobody likes to admit. For centuries, Native American identity wasn't defined by science. It was defined by colonial paperwork. Roles were created when it was convenient. People were counted when it served a purpose. Others were excluded because recognition meant land, money, or power. And suddenly, in the 21st century, we expect a DNA test to clean up that mess. That's like asking Google Maps to fix roads built in 1800. DNA tests compare you to reference populations, samples from people alive today. But many tribes were displaced, merged, renamed, or wiped out before anyone ever collected samples. So when a DNA test says 0% Native American, sometimes it doesn't mean you have no native ancestry. It means history did a very good job hiding it. And when a test says, yes, Native American detected, it still doesn't mean a tribe owes you recognition. Because tribes aren't DNA clubs. They are living nations. Now here's where I need you. Should identity be based on blood, culture, history, or community? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm reading them, and history might be too. If this video is making you rethink DNA tests you trusted too much, tap the like button so YouTube pushes this conversation instead of cat videos. Subscribe if you enjoy history told with honesty and calm. not shouting. And share this with someone who thinks ancestry and identity are the same thing, respectfully. Stay till the end, because the truth isn't that DNA is wrong. It's that we keep asking it the wrong question. DNA tests feel powerful because they come in clean charts and confident percentages. They look official. They look final. But here's what DNA tests actually do, in plain language. They don't scan your entire past. They don't open a time portal. They don't magically read history. DNA tests compare you to reference databases, real people who are alive today and have agreed to be tested. That's it. No reference group, no result. And here's the part most ads skip over politely. Those databases are incomplete, very incomplete, especially when it comes to Native American ancestry. Why? Because many native tribes were displaced, killed, undocumented, or renamed during colonization. Some were merged into other groups. Some were erased on paper long before DNA testing ever existed. You can't compare DNA to people who were never recorded. You can't match ancestry to communities that history wiped off the map. Soft humor moment, breathe with me. DNA tests don't look back 10,000 years. They look back to whoever survived long enough to be tested. And suddenly, those confident percentages don't feel so confident anymore. This is why two siblings can take the same DNA test and get different results. This is why your results can change after an update. And this is why a test can say 0% Native American, even when family history says otherwise. Because DNA doesn't measure identity. Say that again slowly. DNA doesn't measure identity. It measures who history allowed to remain visible. Identity comes from shared culture, from community, from stories passed down when written records were taken away. DNA is powerful, but it's not a judge, a historian, or a gatekeeper. So let me ask you something honestly. If a group was erased before it could be tested, should its descendants disappear too? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Respectful conversations only. History is heavy enough already. If this explanation just saved you from over-trusting a DNA chart, hit the like button so more people hear this side of the story. Subscribe if you enjoy history explained with clarity, calm, and just enough humor to keep us sane. And share this video with someone who still thinks DNA percentages equal identity, gently. Because science is amazing, but it was never meant to carry the weight of erased history. This is the part where the story gets quiet. Because tribes weren't just conquered. They were redefined. Names were changed, not accidentally, but intentionally. Languages were banned, not because they were dangerous, but because they were memory. Children were taken to boarding schools and taught that survival meant forgetting who they were. And while this was happening, records were being destroyed or rewritten. Census rolls decided who counted. Blood quantum rules reduced identity to fractions. Entire communities disappeared on paper while still breathing in real life. And here's the line that matters. America didn't just take land, it took names, memory, and proof. Sit with that. Because proof is everything now. Today, people are asked to prove native identity with documents created during the very system that erased them. That's like asking someone to prove a fire existed, using papers that burned in it. Now let me gently add a moment of humor, because history is heavy and we're human. Imagine telling your great-grandparents, "Sorry, your culture doesn't exist anymore. It didn't make the spreadsheet." Yeah, ridiculous. But that's essentially what happened. So when someone today asks for DNA proof, we have to ask the real question. Proof of what? Proof that colonization failed? Proof that erasure didn't work? Or proof that identity should fit neatly into modern boxes created long after the damage was done? Tribes aren't just ancestry groups. They are nations that survived policy, violence, and forced forgetting. And survival doesn't always leave clean paperwork. So before we demand DNA percentages, we need to understand the past that decided who was allowed to exist on record and who wasn't. Now I want you in this conversation. If identity was rewritten by force, should modern proof rely on those same records? Drop your thoughts below. Keep it respectful. We're talking about real people, not just history books. If this section made you pause, tap the like button so this story keeps moving. Subscribe if you want history told with honesty, not shortcuts. And share this video with someone who thinks identity is simple. History never was. Because blood tells a story. But power decided which stories were allowed to be written. This is where we slow down and speak carefully. Because when tribes question DNA, it's not fear of science. It's a memory. Tribal membership was never built around test tubes and percentages. It was built around community, culture, shared survival, and something modern systems often forget: political sovereignty. Tribes are nations, living ones. They have governments, responsibilities, histories, and wounds that didn't come from ancestry charts. They came from lived experience. Here's the truth most people miss. Tribes don't exist because of DNA. They exist because of relationships. Relationship means who raised you, who taught you the language, who buried your ancestors, who you showed up for, and who showed up for you when policies, poverty, and pressure tried to erase you. DNA can't measure that. And history explains why tribes are careful. For generations, outsiders used blood rules to limit native identity, not protect it. Blood quantum wasn't about honoring culture. It was about reducing numbers. Fewer recognized people meant fewer treaty obligations. So when tribes hear, "My DNA says I belong," some don't hear curiosity. They hear centuries of systems trying to define them from the outside. Gentle humor moment, breathe. If DNA decided family, Thanksgiving would be a spreadsheet. No stories, no aunties, just percentages arguing over who gets extra food. Ridiculous, right? But that's the point. Family, culture, and nationhood are relational, not mathematical. That doesn't mean DNA is useless. It means it has a lane, an identity, isn't it? So when tribes set membership rules based on community and continuity, they aren't rejecting science. They're protecting survival. Now I want you involved. If identity comes from shared life and responsibility, should DNA have the final word? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Respect matters here. If this perspective added clarity, hit the like button so this conversation reaches more people willing to listen. Subscribe if you want history explained with care, not conflict. And share this video with someone who thinks identity is just data. Humanity is more complex than that. Because DNA can tell you where you come from, but relationship tells you who you belong to. And history shows why that difference matters. Lower your voice for this part, because this isn't theory anymore. It's practice. DNA is no longer being used just to explore ancestry. It's being used to validate identity, to deny land claims, to question sovereignty, and quietly to reduce living cultures into percentages. That should make you uncomfortable. Because once identity becomes data, it becomes manageable. Once it becomes manageable, it becomes controllable. And here's the line that matters. When identity becomes a number, power decides the cutoff. Sit with that. Who decides what percentage is enough? 1/4, 1/8, one update away from zero? History has already answered this question before. Blood quantum laws weren't created to honor native identity. They were designed to shrink it over time. Fewer recognized people meant fewer obligations. Fewer obligations meant more land, more control, more silence. DNA didn't invent this idea. It inherited it. Now imagine using modern science to finish what old policies started. A land claim is challenged. Not with history, not with treaties, but with percentages. A community's sovereignty is questioned, not by its people, but by a database. Culture is asked to justify itself in decimals. That's not science leading society. That's power borrowing science's credibility. Let's be clear and mature here. DNA itself isn't evil, but how it's used matters. Because history shows us something uncomfortable. Power rarely uses science innocently. Science has been used to justify slavery, to rank humans, to erase cultures politely, with charts instead of chains. So when someone says it's just data, ask yourself, who benefits from this data deciding identity? Who loses when belonging becomes harder to prove? Now I want you to feel this, not answer quickly. If DNA becomes the gatekeeper of identity, who holds the gate? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This isn't about arguing, it's about awareness. If this section made your chest tighten even a little, hit the like button so this conversation doesn't disappear. Subscribe if you want history told honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. And share this video with someone who trusts numbers more than people, gently. Because numbers feel neutral, but history reminds us they're often holding someone else's power. When you're ready, next we can write the final conclusion, hope plus warning. Create cinematic image prompts for this section, or craft shorts that pull from this moment. Just say the word. So here we are, after the science, after the history, after the uncomfortable parts. We're left with a simple question that refuses to stay simple. Who gets to decide who is native? Is it science? Science can explain migration patterns and shared ancestry. But science doesn't attend ceremonies. It doesn't carry grief. And it doesn't live with the consequences of survival. Is it government? Governments have counted, recounted, erased, and redefined native people for centuries, usually when land, money, or control were involved. So trusting the same system to define identity now feels complicated at best. Is it DNA companies? Private databases updated by the market, shaped by who sends in saliva, and changes every time a new dataset appears. Useful tools, yes. Final judges of identity? That's a heavy job for a pie chart. Or is it the people themselves? Communities that survived removal, boarding schools, bans, and silence. Families that held culture together when being visible were dangerous. Nations that exist not because they were measured, but because they endured. Let's add one small human moment, because thinking too hard makes everyone tense. If identity were truly decided by databases, family reunions would need IT support. Sorry, Grandma, the update changed. You're now a distant cousin. Absurd, but revealing. Here's the question I want you to sit with, not rush past. If your family survived erasure, should a database decide your truth? There's no easy answer. And maybe that's the point. History teaches us that identity has always been shaped by power. Science teaches us patterns, not belonging. And people carry stories that numbers can't translate. So maybe the real danger isn't asking who belongs. Maybe it's believing the answer should be simple. If this conversation stretched the way you think, tap the like button so it keeps reaching thoughtful minds. Subscribe if you value history that invites questions instead of handing out conclusions. And share this video with someone who believes identity fits neatly into a box. History never did. Because the hardest truths don't shout. They ask, if you... So here we are, after the science, after the history, after the uncomfortable parts. We're left with a simple question that refuses to stay simple. Who gets to decide who is native? Is it science? Science can explain migration patterns and shared ancestry. But science doesn't attend ceremonies. It doesn't carry grief. And it doesn't live with the consequences of survival. Is it government? Governments have counted, recounted, erased, and redefined native people for centuries, usually when land, money, or control were involved. So trusting the same system to define identity now feels complicated at best. Is it DNA companies? Private databases updated by the market, shaped by who sends in saliva, and changes every time a new dataset appears. Useful tools, yes. Final judges of identity? That's a heavy job for a pie chart. Or is it the people themselves? Communities that survived removal, boarding schools, bans, and silence. Families that held culture together when being visible were dangerous. Nations that exist not because they were measured, but because they endured. Let's add one small human moment, because thinking too hard makes everyone tense. If identity were truly decided by databases, family reunions would need IT support. Sorry, Grandma, the update changed. You're now a distant cousin. Absurd, but revealing. Here's the question I want you to sit with, not rush past. If your family survived erasure, should a database decide your truth? There's no easy answer. And maybe that's the point. History teaches us that identity has always been shaped by power. Science teaches us patterns, not belonging. And people carry stories that numbers can't translate. So maybe the real danger isn't asking who belongs. Maybe it's believing the answer should be simple. If this conversation stretched the way you think, tap the like button so it keeps reaching thoughtful minds. Subscribe if you value history that invites questions instead of handing out conclusions. And share this video with someone who believes identity fits neatly into a box. History never did. Because the hardest truths don't shout. They ask. If you take a breath here, no music rush, no fast cuts, just truth sitting in the room. DNA is a tool, history is a weapon, and identity is a story we're still arguing over. That's not an opinion, that's a pattern. Throughout this video, we've talked about science, tribes, records, percentages, and power, but underneath all of it is something older and simpler: memory. Who gets remembered, who gets written down, and who disappears between the pages. Because when people talk about identity today, they often ask the wrong question. They ask, "Who are you?" as if the answer should fit neatly into a chart. But maybe the real question is quieter and heavier. Who got erased before you could know? Think about it. How many names were never recorded? How many languages were punished out of existence? How many families learned that survival meant silence? Not because they wanted to forget, but because forgetting was safer. That doesn't show up in a DNA test. And that's not an attack on science. Science helps us ask better questions, but history reminds us that not everyone was allowed to leave evidence behind. So when we reduce identity to percentages, we risk finishing the job erasure started. Now let's gently lighten the moment, because even a heavy truth deserves a human smile. If identity were really that simple, we'd all walk around with barcodes on our foreheads and customer service numbers for our ancestors. Press 1 to find your roots. Press 2 if your history was interrupted. Absurd, right? Exactly. Identity isn't a product. It isn't a purity test. It isn't a spreadsheet. It's lived, it's shared, it's carried, even when the paperwork is gone. So here's where I invite you in. If this video made you pause, sit with that feeling. That's history knocking, not to accuse, but to be acknowledged. Drop a comment with your thoughts, not debates, not insults, just reflection. Tap like if you believe stories matter as much as science. Subscribe if you want history told with honesty, not shortcuts. And share this with someone who thinks identity is simple because history never was. We don't inherit just DNA. We inherit silence, survival, and unfinished stories. And maybe understanding that is the first step toward telling them right.